distinction we have to understand. And so uh, a lot of work, uh, uh, if we see uh, uh, the beginning of his ethnographical study, that took place in Amazon indigenous tribes, and uh, particularly uh, language is important for a structuralist in general, and Levi-Strauss is in particular, is because uh, the understanding of language, as invoked by Susro, is language is not something that we use. Language shapes us. So this understanding of language was a kind of significant, at least two region. First, language meant that um, mm, uh, the reality is easy to decode. First is, it means that language depends on a complicated set of rules. Even we need not to conscious of them it in order to communicate. Second, it suggested that language could be analyzed as a formal system or a structure. So the content becomes irrelevant. So these rules applied in theory to any language and were at play no matter the subject under discussion. So one of the revelation of Sylvia Strauss is that structuralism uh, is very important. Like the way we understand the whole uh, birth and popularization of existentialism as done by Jean-Paul Sartre, the same way structuralism, the credit goes to Sylvie Strauss, and structuralism is become a kind of popular method or approach to understand the study of uh, culture in terms of linguistic phenomena. And also one of the important concept which C. Levi-Strauss learned from Roman Jebiction is from a concept of myth, you know, and uh, it was Roman Jebiction who broke down all the word into uh, phonemes, you know, a kind of smallest possible unit of signification. And he broke down all myths into mythins, the smallest possible unit of the meaning. Just as phenomena were organized into diverse pattern to create the particularities of language. So a lot of important understanding that C. Levi-Strauss drawn from, because when we understand a thinker, you must acknowledge uh, what are the important source of inspiration of those thinker. And when we think about the inspiration, these are the thinker like Roman Jeviction, Susro. These are the thinkers who gave a kind of helped Sylvia Strauss to think something new for that matter. And for that matter, when we understand social structure, although social structure, the word given by Herbert Spencer, we learned a lot of things in sociology from biology. But Radcliffe Brown was a British anthropologist who actually has kind of authority on social structure. But C. Levi-Strauss opposed Radcliffe Brown that social structure is actually He said like social structure has nothing to do with the empirical reality, but with the models which are built after it, right? So social relations are the things that empirically exist, and it acts as the new raw material out of which models making is done. So, C. Levi-Strauss was not very much concerned about making a theory, but making a model. It is we can't give truth, a legitimate truth, but we can give model of truth, right? So that is the kind of relativist, assumption. And that is why C. Levi Strauss is also had a very critique towards reductionist or positivist scientists for that matter, right? So model is the crucial thing for C. Levi Strauss, and so there are two type of model he gave: set one and uh, we call conscious, that is horse-made model, and unconscious, that is scientific model. Then he second set he talks about mechanical model and aesthetical model. So when persons in a society make some model about their society, then that model is called a kind of a house-made model. So in ethnomethodology, we actually try to decode that model for that matter. For example, tribes, have their own biasness towards good and badness. Right? So when a scientific researcher outside, does work in making the model about society, then it is called scientific model. So it has a kind of list biasness. So he also talked about, suppose you are a Punjabi and you want to study Punjab, or you have other chance to study Haryana, then it's better to you to understand Haryana, because then you will have more impartial, attitude. So that is also important. So for methodological point of view, see, Levi Strauss has so many a kind of jewelry of concepts which we can use for that matter. Uh, his method is a kind of where synchronic. Synchronic means timeless rather than uh, dichronic, yani, historical. So he's against that deterministic sense of modeling. Uh, so he also study um, uh, a kind of, if you understand his philosophy, of course he did not claim himself as a philosopher, but his influence, you can see a kind of distinction between analytical British American and continental French and German philosophy. Oh, so the analytic tradition is a kind of has a empirically, very much obsessed with empiricism. It holds that observation does and should and control the concept, and is principally concerned with the clarification of language and logical structure. Um, so Levi Strauss has a kind of good engagement with many important thinkers like Sigmund Freud, Marxism, and his the crucial work for my understanding is uh, his book called Elementary Structure of Kinship. So, a kind of kinship is one concept which a kind of obsessively anthropologists, study kinship, but the important of Levi Strauss is very much important when he was the one who talked about rules governing marriage, law stabilizing dissent, and that paved a very new conceptualization so far as the his sociology of kinship is concerned. And with the help of the structural analysis, Levi-Strauss, could state it to make sense of this mass of data. So, um, uh, Levi-Strauss' concept of insect taboo and all, in UGC net, there are so many questions around it, and particularly when he differentiated between the two groups, that it was possible spouse and prohibited spouse. That is very important, and uh, and the effect of this rule, he argued, was to force men to bring wives into the family and sisters or, and this elaborate exchange of women and was the motive, force of all social life. And this is very very empirical, idea which he claimed, and the reason man left home at all. So and all of us, men and women, whether we knew it or not, had the programs of our life scripted to the rhythm of this logic. You know, so uh, a lot of important things that we can learn, particularly his idea of totemism, and how he critique functionalist anthropologist, and finally even anthropologists accepted that there need to be a re-examination of reinterpretation of primitive social structure for that matter, and uh, uh, a kind of Marlowe Boss, also influenced by Levi-Strauss, and Levi-Strauss also influenced many post-structuralist and postmodernist thinker, and even John Piaget, kind of structuralist. He called himself as a hard scientist, but he was very much influenced by the a kind of, if you see, a good constructive criticism, a kind of critical engagement between uh, uh, John Piaget and social scientist is important to understand for that matter. Any other class we will talk about that thing. So the concept of myth is very important, and uh, uh, after the World War II, and of course, there is a popular trend of structuralism. The study of language become very prominent, and so language is a kind of a special element of human culture. And as far as the linguistic structuralism is concerned, that whatever a person utters a word, he use his mind or brain. So the use of language makes a individual into a person, a biological man into a cultural man. So language is therefore, decoding of language is important in understanding or decoding of social structure of society. He wrote a book called Mythologies, and he has done a structural analysis of myth, which is very very important. And myth originates from unconscious mind of a man, and to study the complete structure of myth, one should study its part, its fragments. Right? And that is very important. If you understand any society, just try to understand the fragments of the society, language for that matter, tradition, rituals for that. So Levi Strauss, also talked about a kind of, uh, you know, his important contribution for that, like a family, marriage. Uh, so uh, I think one book that I recommend you to read is Trestus Tropicus, which is a important text, and it has a kind of newness of perspective, which is important. So uh, he has Levi Strauss has also very much when we understand the scope of anthropology, their nature and scope of anthropology, there the Levi Strauss contribution is very much important. I think that is why he is considered to be the father of modern anthropology. Levi Strauss has also very uh, mm, uh, good approach towards Marxism. He had never criticized Marxism as an opponent of Marxism, although he mentioned that one of his friend urged him to read Das Kapital, uh, though he would later say that he did not really understand it. But he has a kind of good understanding. Of course, he has spent his time in France and the United States of America, but he said that Brazil was important experience of his life, and UNICEF also, made him a kind of good, a kind of ambassador that matter, and a kind of a uh, and he also talked about a kind of uh, anthropology as a discipline, how anthropology uh, can have a kind of better future for that matter. So, of course, his idea is very, very deep, and I think even many important thinkers like Carl Jung, for that matter, he accepted Levi Strauss many important concepts of his archetype. Of course, Jung archetype is very much different, but in structural anthropology, a structural anthropologist, unlike Jungian psychologist, they recognizes the universal form of unconscious mind. There is no such thing as universal content. So uh, the myth is one of the important contribution of Sylvia Strauss, which is very much important, and we can see a kind of engagement of this Oedipus complex. And so, of course, Levi Strauss did not claim himself as an kind of philosopher, but he was very much influenced by the work of Rousseau, and um, and he always, Levi Strauss always wanted anthropology to become more democratic science, and he said that anthropology in the field recapitulates the original moral lucidity with which the earliest human uh, discern their true relation, not only to other human but all the living creatures. So a kind of he Levi Strauss, or a kind of talked about in his book Trapius Tropicus, where he said he must, anthropologist must be capable of giving himself wholeheartedly to the society. So his objectivity is also one of the uh, new objectivity in a sense of methodology he gave. And uh, he said that, no society is perfect. It is the nature of all society to include a degree of impurity, incom- incompatible with the norms they proclaim, and which finds concrete expression in a certain doses of injustice, insensitiveness, and cruelty. But one learned the cardinal lessons. He said that there is no society is fundamentally good, but that none is absolutely bad. So that is the very important epistemological lessons, I would say, which uh, uh, C. Levi-Strauss talked about. C. Levi-Strauss also talked about a kind of sensibility towards culture, towards the others, we must have. And so a kind of he focus he told that a cultural relativist perspective needs to be incorporated, internalized. So he kind of mm, a newness, as you can see in his perspective. So in 1965, um, Smithsonian Institute, Levi-Strauss gave a lecture, and where he said that how an anthropologist can behave in a society, should behave in a society. So this was Sylvia Strauss,